to the view, every angle on you, from the sweat on your face to the roar in the blue. Welcome to the view, every second rings true. Sit back, lean in, yeah, enjoy the view.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Monday and welcome to Croke Park, a dry, bright and sunny Croke Park for the latest episode of The View, as always brought to you by Allianz. So spring has finally sprung, and that means one thing. The Allianz Leagues in both hurling and football are starting to take shape, and we'll have, as always, special guests joining us to look back at all the action. A little later in the show, we'll be touching on the Allianz Hurling Leagues, and we have All-Ireland winners joining us from both Galway and Limerick. David Burke and Séamus Flanagan will be joining us. They'll be happy with their team's results yesterday, and they'll also touch on the marquee game in Nolan Park yesterday as Ben O'Connor's Rebels continued their form. They took care of Kilkenny. On the football side, direct from Ballyshannon, he's been on the road for the last 18 hours, I'd say. It's Donegal's Kevin Cassidy joining me in studio. He was pitchside for a dramatic draw between his native Donegal and Pádraig Joyce's Galway. And joining us online is the great Cork legend, Bríd Stack, friend of GAA Plus, but making her debut on The View. Stacky, thanks for joining us today.
How are you, Paddy? How are you keeping? Hi, Kevin.
Hi, how are you?
Stacky, I'll tell you what, Stacky.
There's a vomiting bug in the house. I'm like a boxer ducking and diving at the moment, but all good so far.
We've been trying to get you on for weeks when Cork were going well, but we brought you on after they've lost by 20 points, so we'll get to that later on.
Yeah.
But before we get into all of that, we will look at the results across all the Allianz Football League divisions. In Division 1, as mentioned, Donegal and Galway played out a dramatic draw up in Ballyshannon. Kerry, far too much for Monaghan, and Monaghan's dismal form in the division continues. Mayo just pipped Armagh yesterday in a classic game in Castlebar. And one of the surprises of the weekend, the Rossies' hot form came to a halt in the Hyde, Dublin, and their best performance under Ger Brennan, picking up 2 much-needed points. In Division 2, Louth continued their fine renaissance. They to win on Saturday night up in Breffni Park against Cavan. Tyrone got the show back on the road, accounting for Offaly. Kildare in tough conditions in Newbridge on Saturday night. They couldn't match Robbie Brennan's Meath. And one of the big stories from the weekend, as mentioned, Derry 131 to a 14-point victory over Cork. The Rebels' run came to a shuddering halt. Division 3 down, they're 5 from 5, 118 to 115 against Fermanagh. Laois surprisingly took out Westmeath. Limerick couldn't catch up with Clare, 121 to 112 victory there for Clare. And Wexford 16 points to 1-7 victors over Sligo. In Division 4, Antrim had too much for Ushie McConville's Wicklow. London with a 316 to 213 victory over Waterford. One of the surprises, Joe Murphy, their 100% record came to an end on Saturday night. Longford had too much, 119 to 114, and Tipperary accounted for Leitrim convincingly with a 118 to 8-point victory on Saturday. So, as mentioned, a full schedule of games, lots of talking points, but I suppose the first place to start yesterday, Kevin, a bit of a surprise in the Hyde. Dublin easing their relegation worries with a convincing 11-point victory over Roscommon. Was that a bit of a surprise?
I think it was, Paddy. Like when you look at, I suppose, based on how Dublin have performed to this, and then how the Rossies have played and going to the Hyde. So definitely last week I would have thought maybe Dublin would have struggled, but credit to Ger Brennan and not so much his new guys but his older guys this weekend.
Still need them.
Yeah, fairly pulled them out of the fire. So listen, a massive 2 points and it still gives Dublin something to play for.
Yeah, Ger Brennan alluded to this afterwards. They were 114 to 1-1 up at half time, and some of the points Ger was making afterwards was that, look, we're 5 rounds into the league. You're starting to see maybe some of the newer players knitting in with some of the older players, the more established players that Kevin mentioned, and also some, most notably the 2-pointers. Maybe some of Ger's messaging is starting to sink in with the team. Is that fair to say, Bríd?
Yeah, sure, it definitely is. And you don't have to look too far into that Dublin team to see that there's still an absolute amount of lads there that have plenty All-Ireland medals in their back pocket. So I suppose, you mentioned there about the 2-pointers. There was 5 2-pointers kicked by Dublin at the weekend, and I suppose before that, even just going back to the Monaghan game, you see the balls that were being dropped short. There was probably pot shots being taken from all angles. Whereas at the weekend, Dublin were getting into better positions. They were running hard. Everything was with huge intent, and they made no mistake. And I suppose to come away to win by 11 points is massive for Dublin, and they'll take huge satisfaction out of it. And I suppose it's brilliant for building going forward. Yeah.
Yeah, Kevin, on Bríd's points, the 2-pointers in particular, they were probably one of the worst teams at executing that in last year's championship, and that was the big question mark, whoever took over from Dessie Farrell, how Dublin could kind of catch up around the 2-point scoring. It's such an important part of modern Gaelic football, and as Bríd alluded to, it hadn't really been going well over the first 4 rounds of the league, but yesterday you see how important it is. Andy Moran spoke a couple of weeks ago about teams needing to break 20 points really to win big games. Dublin hadn't really been anywhere near that. 121 yesterday and 5 2-pointers. It is going to be key for them going forward, isn't it?
It is, Paddy, and do you know what? I know they haven't been excellent at them, but at least they've attempted them. And reading Gerard's comments and listening to him, even before last week's game, they were on about, we're trying to work and stuff, but it's not happening yet. And yesterday it started to happen for them. So, the 5 2-pointers are massive. You look at the likes of Scully kicking 2-pointers, Paddy Small coming in kicking. So those are the big players that Dublin need. Obviously, Con wasn't there. He's well capable of kicking. I think 2-pointers are massive, not known in terms of winning games, but it brings you back into games, Paddy. See if you're 6-8 points behind.
The big momentum swingers, aren't they?
Yeah, and if you don't have a 2-point threat and you're 6 points down or 7 points down, teams can pretty much sit off you. So it's massive that it's starting to happen for Dublin, and Gerard will be delighted.
Yeah. Bríd, that's all up front. What about the other end of the pitch for Dublin? There's obviously the challenge. Obviously in goal, Hugh Sullivan seemed to have he's had a brilliant couple of weeks, most notably outside against Monaghan here in that victory. And again yesterday, Gerard's going to be looking for new players to kind of come in and support the likes of Owen Merchant and Brian Howard and these guys. But in particular in goals, that position has been pretty closed off for the last 20 years. You were impressed with Hugh Sullivan yesterday?
Yeah, I was. I suppose, he had a point-blank save here versus Enda Smith coming in, point blank, stood up so well. And then I suppose, Roscommon could probably say that just was not on their side. They didn't get the rebound either, came off the post. So, but just getting that intent, I suppose, to block up everything, close angles, especially against Monaghan. He probably kept them in the game against Monaghan, probably was the reason that they got over the line versus Monaghan, to be honest.
Definitely.
You're just seeing the repeat efforts from him. He's a fantastic addition to them, and definitely a bit of a head scratcher now for Ger going into championship.
Yeah, I think isn't that what any new manager really wants, guys, in terms of the Dublin team, the successful team had been so settled. For the guts of a decade, obviously Stephen Cluxton in goal for 2 decades, but Ger, he's consistently said this, not being overly concerned with results. He's looking for a style of play and identifying people like Hugh O'Sullivan, and I think probably needed 3 or 4 others as well. That's what we're going to see over the next couple of weekends. Yeah,
definitely, Paddy. I think obviously you look back to the great Dublin team, and obviously Cluxton was there, and you had Comerford then, who was sitting, maybe not getting as much exposure as he would have liked or needed. I go back to the first game out here in Croke Park when Donegal were here. I know we looked at the shot stopping there, but the kickouts were a real problem for Dublin. I think that's what Gerard's trying to look at, especially when you look at the size that Dublin have. Paddy Coffey Byrne, okay, he's a big unit. McGinnis, big unit. Con's a big man. But when you look at your Galways, your Donegals, the big men around the middle. So I think that's an area that Gerald can focus on now. The shot stop was brilliant, but the kickouts for me is the main one.
For the Rossies, Bríd, they had a bit of momentum over the last couple of weeks. Brilliant win against Armagh, the Hyde, and then obviously the comeback victory in Salt Hill against Galway. They had that bit of momentum, but yesterday put a big halt to that, obviously. And they have Donegal and Mayo in the last 2 games. Was marked out a bit concerned there that they maybe missed the boat in terms of maybe going for the league title, or he's happy enough that they're relatively secure, and yesterday was just an aberration?
Yeah, yesterday definitely seemed like a bit of an outlier, given the run of form that they've had the last couple of games. And even their first day out versus Kerry, they were extremely competitive. So, yeah, I'd say it wouldn't be a throw out all the systems kind of job, but I suppose they'll definitely see that, there's elements that they need to work on. When you look at Roscommon, it's their firepower has been absolutely immense. And yesterday, Derek Craig, I suppose, while he got the rebound for the goal, he was held to a point. Dermot Murta was held to 2 points. So for them, maybe just smaller things to tweak on. They're probably very happy that they are, not even in bones for relegation or anything like that. But I suppose certainly, facing into the last 2 rounds, they probably would have liked the cushion of going in against Dublin, but or getting over Dublin. But I suppose last weekend versus Galway was such an emotive game, a big Connacht derby, and to get over Galway was huge. So maybe a lot of energy expelled there, but certainly not, I suppose, a massive cause of concern for Roscommon. They're a very professional team and will probably draw a line under this game and, I suppose, be ready for Donegal in 2 weeks' time with full ammunition ready to go.
Yeah, and that's the nature of the national leagues. Obviously, that we're 5 rounds in, it's very attritional. It's hard for teams, maybe outside of even Donegal, to just go continuously back to back to back to back. But what it does mean, yesterday's result, as 5 rounds in, it bunches up that relegation zone. Monaghan were beaten well by Kerry. It looks like they are all but consigned to Division 2. But what it does mean look at the standings, Donegal still in pole position despite the draw yesterday. Like I say, Monaghan bringing up the relegation places. But Armagh pipped again yesterday. Kieran McGee's team playing very well but just not getting the points on the board. Dublin and Galway both on 4 points. And you feel it's probably the Rossies have done enough to avoid the relegation piece. But between Dublin, Galway and Armagh, and we see these teams have to play each other as well. Dublin and Armagh the next day is a massive, massive game just outside in Croke Park. Kevin, at this stage, what do we think? Who's going to be joining Monaghan in Division 2? And look, if it is either Ger Brennan's Dublin, Kieran McGee's Armagh or Pádraig Joyce's Galway, will they be overly concerned? They're all experienced teams in their own right.
I don't think it'll be Galway. I think Galway will do enough to stay up. The 2 teams you touched on there, probably Dublin and Armagh, I think is the worst thing if any of them drop to Division 2. Not really. 2 opposite ends of the scale. Armagh, with their recent success, if they drop to Division 2, they won't take it, it won't be a big thing to carry. Dublin mightn't be the worst position to be in with all these young guys coming through. So the next game here could decide the whole lot when Armagh come to play Dublin. Like you touched on Armagh there, I think Armagh have been excellent.
Yeah,
really
at different stages in games. They just haven't got, like Kieran McGee spoke about it yesterday, they're doing lots of good things, but they just can't kick the effing ball over the bar. Was seeing the frustration there, but that is a massive game in 2 weeks' time. Bríd, on Monaghan, they have Galway next. I suppose it's the manner of the defeats which have been the most worrying things. You felt it was a big game a couple of weeks ago outside against Dublin. They came up short, but the last 2 results, like hammered by Mayo in Clones and then well beaten down in Killarney yesterday. Do we see any way out for Monaghan, or is it the die is cast for them, do we feel?
Yeah, unfortunately, I suppose, look, they've just had a really hard run of form, and I suppose 3 big retirements last year, and apparently dealing with 11 injuries to key players, so any team would be really suffering at that, but I suppose looking to get back a couple of lads coming into the championship, I imagine that they're just drawing a bit of a line under the league at the moment. I suppose 3 of their defeats were to double scores, so they're definitely under a lot of pressure in this division at the moment, and I suppose, look, unfortunately, it looks like they will be dropping a division,
Yeah, and on that big game, Bríd, obviously Dublin Armagh outside in 2 weeks' time. Do you share Kevin's view? Armagh, probably surprising, they've played very well, that they're down in that relegation battle.
Yeah. I suppose Dublin Armagh now is going to be the biggest game next weekend. It will decide a lot. Armagh definitely need to get over Dublin, I suppose, to make sure that they try to draw it to head-to-head as much as possible. And I definitely think Armagh have the capabilities of it. If you were to say that Armagh were close to the bottom of the pile there, and you're trying to size them up versus Monaghan as 2 teams that could potentially go down, they're poles apart in their levels of consistency, and Armagh have been just pipped at the post in so many games, so many fantastic games the last couple of weeks that we've all enjoyed, and just have fallen short at the very end. And I suppose it's just that goal scoring ability at the moment that seems to be evading them, and it's probably just the smallest tweak, and when that starts clicking with them, Armagh could be a massive problem for any team.
I think so. At the other end of the division, Kevin, you were in Ballyshannon, you were pitchside yesterday. Donegal's 100% record went, but Paddy Morgan's late scored and sure they got a draw. You're happy enough with where Donegal are at? They still look like they're going to be in pole position to at least be in a league final.
We are, Paddy. We're happy enough, but again, under no illusions. Like, we're full tilt, whereas a lot of other teams maybe have poised to come back in. And if I suppose they were taking one thing away from Donegal yesterday, I think we have maybe 17 or 18 of the best players in the country, and when they're on the pitch, I think maybe Kerry, possibly Armagh, might stay with us. But if we were to lose one or two, Paddy, that's where I'd be concerned. So
that depth.
Yeah, like, we have good young lads, but are they ready for this stage? Same as the Dublin lads. So that's the thing Jim will keep an eye on. Now, will he go down to Roscommon full tilt? Murphy's going by reports yesterday, he's going to play in Roscommon, so that's a big twist. So, you know, at this stage, I think we're nearly there. A one in Roscommon will probably see us over the line. And then it's all about who we face out here in the final then.
Well, look, speaking about young lads, one of the big stories again from the weekend and from 2 weeks ago was over in Castlebar. Kobe MacDonald, 18 years of age, a dream debut against Monaghan, hitting 1-4. He came on in the 51st minute yesterday against a seasoned Armagh defence, and he had a massive impact again. What do we make of this guy? Like, at his age, 18, Bríd, have you seen anything like this guy before at this age?
Oh, he's just a bit of a Rolls Royce already, like, you know.
Kobe mania.
Debut, the world of pressure was nearly on his shoulders, but like, he came on yesterday with 20 minutes to go, and like, he not only just showed obviously the same pace and skill and everything that he had, he also showed like aerial prowess, and it's just his confidence, the confidence for someone so young. You might show the clip there now, you know, in the next reel, but like, he cut through the Armagh defence, and I suppose the question was, how would he get on versus a more seasoned defence? But like, look at him, like, he's taking on, it's just the confidence of someone so young, the skill, he's both footed, and as I said, like, he has that aerial prowess as well as all the power that he has behind him. So he's a massive addition to Andy Moran's side. But Cian McHale was also absolutely outstanding. Like, and I know Andy Moran mentioned him afterwards as well. Cian McHale was unbelievable for his first day out as well, his first full start with Mayo. So like 1-3, I think he notched up yesterday, and just, I suppose, the pressure that takes off someone like Ryan O'Donoghue. He has so much impact that he can bring off the bench now for Andy Moran, like, you know, and Conor laughed at there as well. It was on yesterday, I think. Conor 3 points as well yesterday, so he has a lot more scoring options from a lot more. He just gives him a lot more variety, you know. So it's definitely exciting to watch Mayo going forward, and I suppose like there's going to a couple of big games left. Yeah,
isn't that's the key thing really for Mayo, isn't it? Traditionally that has been the challenge, whoever was in charge, but Andy Moran, obviously one of the great forwards himself. Kobe MacDonald, he has, even though he's 18, he has the physique of a more seasoned footballer, and I agree with Bríd. He looks like a Rolls Royce already. Cian McHale and his Sigerson exploits. All of a sudden Mayo seem to have these scoring forwards, as you've said, Bríd, to take that burden off Ryan O'Donoghue. They're in a good place, Mayo, aren't they? They are, Paddy, definitely, and I think obviously with the young lads coming through, and the whole hype's about Kobe, and rightly so, because he's unbelievable. But the other young lads there, McHale yesterday was fantastic. Darragh Barnes has a fantastic season. So, and I love what Andy's doing with him. He's managing them well. Like, everybody else might have been tempted to throw Kobe in early in the year, but he's held him back. Even yesterday, he held him back. So I go back to that game against Donegal where Mayo were terrible. Kobe wasn't there. Darragh Barnes was quiet. McHale and then Loftus just came in off the bench. So once they have their full deck, as you said, they're in a good position. They've Kerry next, the All-Ireland champions and reigning Allianz League champions, going under the radar as is usually their style. They accounted for Monaghan yesterday. David Clifford just coming off the bench yesterday, but still racking up 1-3. Bríd, what for those young Mayo stars? They're starting to get more exposure, more talking points, obviously, on shows like this. What challenge do I suppose a more wily, traditional Kerry defence pose for young guns like that in a couple of weeks' time? Yeah, I suppose, like, you know, you're looking at Kerry, and Kerry are only getting stronger as the league is going on. Paddy had his first full game back there yesterday, and you know, you look even take a player like Tom O'Sullivan, and you know, the Kerry defence. They have marked the best forwards in the country for the last couple of years. So they will obviously give huge respect to any player coming in, and they will give them their due attention. But, you know, they're very, very assured of their capabilities as All-Ireland champions. And
I suppose having worked on their defence so well for the last couple of years, you'd imagine that players like Kobe and them may not get the same element of space, and they definitely might get a little bit more attention. But Kerry are only getting stronger from what I can see, and it'll be a great cracker, because Mayo, I suppose, always bring it to Kerry when they travel, and I'm really looking forward to it. It should be a great derby.
I think everyone's looking forward to it now. We're going to see Clifford versus Kobe. We mightn't see much more of this if he does leave for Australia, but I can imagine the narrative around that too. Absolute superstar. So that's something to look forward to in a couple of weeks' time. Stacky, we can't put it off any longer. Division 2, the Rebels were on what a run, 4 from 4. Favourites for promotion, and what happened at the weekend? A 20-point defeat against Derry. Derry have got the momentum behind them themselves over the last couple of weeks, but that must have been a surprise for John Cleary and for the Cork supporters.
Yeah, I suppose the manner in which that they lost was very surprising. But I suppose it was always going to be a challenge going up to Derry. You were going up slightly depleted, like you take into account, right? You're missing players like Tommy Walsh. Mark Cronin was a late omission as well, and he's been flying for the Cork forwards. Brian O'Driscoll is still out, Brian Hurley, and then Ian Maguire is a massive loss around the middle of the field, especially when you take into account that Derry were able to bring back in Conor Glass. So it was always going to be a bit of a challenge. And while they, I suppose, played relatively okay in the first half, it was the second half kind of system failure that just seemed to, they just couldn't deal with the pace and the power that Derry were bringing to the table. So that was very, very disappointing from a Cork point of view. And I suppose, maybe begs the question, have Cork bled enough young players over the league? We saw Dara Sheedy getting a run, which was absolutely brilliant, and he's well up for it. But I suppose you take into account a player like Hugh O'Connor last year. Hugh O'Connor was real up and coming forward. Probably didn't get much game time. Might have gotten a small bit disgruntled, and is now gone to the hurlers. And yesterday got a start with Ben O'Connor versus Kilkenny. So you suppose there's just that little element of are Cork bleeding enough young players when something like this happens, when you need to go deep into your panel. And yesterday, unfortunately, it was very. It wasn't a good look for
Tough
Cork.
day at the office, but still, they've done a lot of positive things over the last 4 or 5 weeks. On that, Derry hadn't won a match for 15 months, Kevin, and all of a sudden they've won their last 4. They've scored 356 in the last couple of games, as well as Kieran Mina nearly timing it right. It's serious green shoots for Derry over the last 3 or 4 weeks after a tough 12 months.
Yeah, Paddy, when you think back to those games last year, even they were unlucky and a lot of occasions.
1 or 2 points in any.
Yeah, so I think a lot was made of it, and then the first night out here against Meath. Stacked their team. I thought they were going to be, really, really strong. They were disappointing the second half, but since then they've really kicked on. And some of the performances, Shane McGuigan kicked 9 scores. I think Conor Glass was immense in the middle of the field. Conor Doherty, young Rory Forbes coming in. So they're adding to their panel. So listen, they're going well.
Look at the league table now on the back of that Derry haven't lost the opening night. They're right back in it. You look, it's between Derry, Meath and Cork. Probably surprising Tyrone are not leading the pack. Stacky, even for Cork, it's a disappointing day yesterday, but they have a home match against Kildare, and you would think if someone gets the 10 points, they're going to get through. If we were to pick 2 lads, who was going up to Division 1? Bríd, you go first. Go on. You have to back Cork.
I suppose, look, going into the Derry game, there was probably a lot of energy expelled as well versus Meath the week before. So they definitely did look a little bit lacklustre. I think they're off in a training camp now next week, and the 2-week break will probably serve them very well. So they play Kildare next, which you would imagine that they will get over a young Kildare team. Derry are out versus Louth, and Meath versus Tyrone. So they're 2 kind of fairly banana skin games, given Louth's late peak in form, the Louth were absolutely outstanding at the weekend versus Cavan. Tyrone versus Meath, it's like you just don't really know what could happen there. And then I suppose the last round, Derry are out versus Cavan and Meath versus Offaly. So it will definitely be a very interesting weekend next weekend to see how Derry and Meath get on. But
Stacky, you're on the fence as usual. Kevin, if we have two names, just two, who's getting promoted?
Derry and Meath.
Derry and Meath. So Cork are missing out. Stacky, you'll hold that against them now the next time you're up.
Fine.
You're happy enough for that. In Division 3, a little bit more clean cut. Down went 5 from 5 at the weekend. They look like they're all set for promotion. And just another competitive team, the Ulster Championship, Kevin, isn't it?
Serious, Paddy. And you look at the work that Conor Laverty's done since he's come in there. Yeah. He's been 3 years with the 20s. He's brought them on. And listen, they have their eyes set in Donegal, make no mistake about it. They have to come to play us in the championship. And you think back last year, the game plan they had nearly worked. Their execution let them down. So, listen, they're straight back up and preparing for the summer now. Yeah,
well, that's a whistle-stop tour of all the Allianz Football League action from the weekend. Bríd, good to chat as always. We'll catch up with you in a few weeks' time. Kevin's going to stay with us in studio, but next it is the Allianz Hurling Leagues, and we'll have David and Séamus to join us to review all that action. And now it's time to catch up on all the action in the Allianz Hurling Leagues in Division 1A and 1B. In 1A, Galway had too much for Peter Kiely's Waterford team in Salt Hill yesterday. Offaly's relegation was confirmed. John Kiely's Limerick were far too hot to handle for them. And in the marquee game in Nolan Park yesterday, Ben O'Connor's Cork continued their fine form with a 3-point victory over Kilkenny. In 1B, Clare had too much for Carlow. They've all but secured their promotion back to Division 1A. Kildare scored a victory over Down, 324 to 123, and Dublin with a comfortable victory over Davy Fitz's Antrim up in Belfast. And joining us now in studio, the lads, I haven't seen us move that quick in years, straight across, David Burke and Séamus Flanagan. Well, look, on last Friday's preview show with Walter Walsh and Owen Cadogan and with Aisling, and they were absolutely convinced Kilkenny were going to get the job done against Cork and Nolan Park yesterday, but Ben O'Connor's men carried on. Dave, what do we make of it?
Yeah, it was a great contest, I suppose, really. The last 10-15 minutes was unreal. You know, the conditions were tough, ball was sticky, but Kilkenny went 5 down. I think at the end you'd be saying that they're going to come back, and they got it back to 1, and then obviously Cork made for goals to get another one. So it was some game now, in fairness, considering the conditions. So I think both will be fairly happy. I think Ben will be obviously more happier that he got a real good test and obviously made a few changes and they come out the right side of it.
Yeah, Séamus mentioned Brian Hayes gets the goal yesterday. It seems to be definitely a tactic. They are going after teams right from the get-go. Any surprise there, or it just seems to be the way Ben O'Connor is approaching this whole season?
It seems the way, I suppose, he's approaching it, but I suppose from the first couple of rounds, what I'd seen was that maybe they were developing that plan B in terms of, score some outside. It wasn't as goal hungry as what they were yesterday, and I think they probably reverted to type yesterday in terms of that ball in, and like we were chatting off air, that it was every ball that went in there was take on your man. The secondary option was to pop the ball out for that score, and I suppose ultimately they were coming out with that scores, but just every ball that goes in, it's so dangerous. You see the ball dropping in here, with Brian Hayes and Alan Connolly inside. It's just the first revert to type, and it's off the shoulder and runners off the shoulder, and that's a clean finish from Brian Hayes there. But I think across the board, it's something that they're targeting, and it's something that they've brought back that they probably hadn't had in the first couple of rounds of the league.
Yeah, it must be very, very difficult to defend against. It's a real man-to-man battle.
The intent they're running at there, you can see, they're hunting down the goals, I suppose, is the term you could describe it as. They're when they get going and it's hard to, if you're tracking ones like that just comes off the bench 30 seconds earlier, and we're just chatting off air that Barco comes on to mark him, but he just jumps up, some goal to get there in the last minute.
They're moving well. They're moving well. Always quotable, Ben O'Connor. He's been great for some content this show over the last couple of weeks. Here's comments from yesterday, which kind of addresses some questions people might have had around Cork. Any fella that puts the handbrake on is going to be left behind. That's just the way it is. We are not minding ourselves. We're driving on full tilt. Guys, you've both won All-Irelands. I'm conscious the schedule has changed. It's a shorter season. It doesn't seem to be any surprises there. Ben O'Connor's been pretty clear on that. Is it sustainable for Cork over the next 4 months to keep that up?
Yeah, look, I'd say a training session Tuesday night now is going to be
spicy.
I was just going through their squad, and my God, I'd say you could pick anyone. Some of the subs he didn't bring on the last day are noticeable even. So I'd say by the sounds of his comments, he's just whoever's going well in training, I'd say he's picking off. So same this week. I'd say whoever's putting their hand up will get a place against Limerick.
Séamus, your side?
I suppose when you look at it, even the players, Walsh and the guy inside from Kiely, they were unheard of before, I think, this weekend. And you just look at what they were able to produce coming in. So you know, in terms of being able to pull up a handbrake, I don't think that's on. And I think that any guy that's given a jersey, it's his jersey to retain. And I think what they're doing on the field and obviously in the training pitch is working for them. But I think that they've uncovered a couple of players there. I suppose the only concern would be that it's a lot of forward-facing players that they've uncovered. I know Darrell Leary at full-back was probably someone this year that was tipped maybe in the last couple of years, but it seems like it's forward-heavy and they were already stacked there. So I suppose my only concern would be for Cork is that maybe defensively they haven't been able to uncover that same calibre of player that they have up top, and maybe that might be a little bit of a cause for concern for Ben.
For any coach, it's the perfect position to be in. You want that competition for places. You're not worried about trying to time runs or taking your foot off the gas. If you have 25 or 30 players, Kevin, to your point on Donegal football side, if it's just 15 or 16 or 17 players, even naturally players might subconsciously take a bit of a step back. But if Ben O'Connor has 25 guys mad for road and training, it's a brilliant position to be in.
Massive. And I think that even, like, you look at Brian Hayes maybe was rested for the first couple of games, and you see who came on, and, you know, Pádraig Power was an unused sub yesterday. Kingston. So I think that even, like, to still have players like that he's probably going to look to get game time in. But I suppose next weekend going down to Limerick, you know, it's an absolute, it's a melter. It's a melter, but to have that, to still have players that he hasn't used, and, you know, I know he spoke about maybe injuries, but I think that all roads lead to the Gaelic grounds on Saturday for Cork, and I think that they're going to, you know, the Harneys of this world and players like that are going to be chomping at the bit to get a crack at that, and I think that's a great position for Cork to be in.
David, you were in Salt Hill yesterday for Micheál Donoghue. A good victory for Galway. Peter Kiely was a little bit disappointed, to say the least, with his Waterford team. Whatever's happened with maybe Cork or Limerick as favourites for it, what position are Galway in, and what did you see yesterday?
Yeah, I think it's been very positive. Like looking at Cork and tipping the first two games, we've done very well. Like, probably should have won potentially both games. Maybe there had a lot of score. Like, our efficiency was letting us down, and maybe a little bit more again yesterday. But we were very good yesterday now, I'd have to say. Like, I suppose maybe the game against Kilkenny last week took it out of Waterford. Looked like there's no real bite to them or something. Desi got injured during the week. Early Daly picks up a knee injury, he goes off injured, so there's probably a little bit of that hanging over them, I'd say. But Galway are very good. Went after Waterford's puck out, kind of dismantled that, and that gave them the platform in the game to go on and win it. Yeah,
and on the Waterford side, Séamus, there's no rest for the wicked. They have Tipperary next. Peter Kiely was disappointed with the performance. Even he spoke after they beat Offaly in Walsh Park a couple of weeks ago, feeling he needs more from his team. A campaign that started with that victory over Limerick. It's a tough position for Waterford to be in now. Do you feel like they need one more positive performance from the Allianz Leagues, but they've tipped next?
They do, and I think that it's been a very up and down roller coaster season for Waterford, and I think that when you think back to the first game, I suppose, against Limerick, that gave, I think everyone was so delighted across all of Munster, because it meant that there was another Munster team that were going to be competing, and the already, I suppose, minefield that is Munster hurling was added to from what Waterford brought in. But I suppose, yeah, you know, the unconvincing win against Offaly, and then to go down against Kilkenny. And I actually took an awful lot of positives from Waterford, from Waterford perspective, from Kilkenny. Ran it really close, and I suppose the manner in which they lost the game, I know we spoke about it last week, but, you know, they were fighting tooth and nail for that, the dispossession, and gave away the free. But just yesterday against Galway, what I saw was, you know, that maybe lacklustre approach to it, you know, a lot of lateral balls moving across the half-back line. Now, I understand that Galway maybe clogged that middle third with their half-forward line, half-back line moving into that middle third, but, you know, it just seemed that there was no plan B. There was nothing, no fallback, and, you know, the full forward for Waterford was on fire the week before against Kilkenny, but just didn't feed him enough ball. And I suppose a cause for concern is just the up and down nature that Waterford have had for the league.
Does that lead to maybe the fatigue that Waterford maybe don't have, the depth that maybe other counties have? We're talking about Cork.
Back, and Desi picks up a knock, and, you know, they just looked to me a little bit disjointed on puck outs and stuff like that yesterday. Didn't have a clear-cut plan, but is there a hangover from that? But, like, they still have a big opportunity this weekend. They're home to Tip. Joe took a beating against Limerick, so, like, Carl will have a bounce out of them this weekend, so it'll be a big game. But, like, Waterford don't play in the last round. So if they're going to stay up, they have to give this a good rattle, and there will be a kick in them, I'd say. Like, he's that game with Galway yesterday now to kind of use against them this week. So, I expect Tip and Waterford to have better performances next weekend. So it's going to be hard to call it, but I reckon Tip would probably win it, and Waterford would probably go down.
Like. On the Galway side, looking ahead to obviously the championship, a lot of focus in the early rounds is obviously around the Munster Hurling Championship, but Kilkenny maybe not as the dominant team, and Leinster looking ahead. Dublin and Wexford are battling it out in Division 1B. For Galway, what's the ceiling for that team this year?
I think a Leinster final is definitely within reach for us. Like, looking at the the squad and what Michael has brought in and the younger guys, they're going really well, you know, like, and there's, you know, really good lads putting their hand up again there yesterday. Cian Daniels is very good at midfield. You know, he's from Tommy Larkins, and you know, Aaron Island is every game he's getting that bit better. Jason Rabbit obviously as well set up the goal for Roney early on. So, you know, if we can keep getting, obviously next weekend again is a huge game against Kilkenny under lights Saturday night. So like, there's no reason we can win that game and potentially not be far away. You know, you're going to play Limerick as well. So I think we're in a good place, and I think Miall's very happy, but we still loads to work on. But Leinster final is definitely a goal for us.
You mentioned earlier, Séamus, probably the biggest game in the next round of fixtures this weekend. Saturday night, Limerick welcome Cork to the Gaelic grounds. Limerick all but confirmed Offaly's relegation down to 1B. They seem to be motoring along very nicely under John Kiely. What do we expect to see in that game on Saturday night in a repeat of last year's Munster final?
I think it has to be a rip-roar, I think, for both.
I think so.
From what Ben O'Connor, I suppose it ties back to what Ben O'Connor said about the handbrake. And, you know, we spoke already today about that Cork and Limerick could potentially meet 5 times between now and an All-Ireland final. And I suppose it's hard to time your run if you're to look at the weekend coming and to say to yourself, I'm going to build for maybe first on a championship. It's a slippery slope. It's a slippery slope because you look for a league final then in a couple of weeks' time, and those teams could face off again. So I think that Saturday leads to, I think, just 2 teams going hammer and tongs. And you look at what Limerick lined out against Offaly at the weekend. That team is probably as good as a team as you're going to line out first on the championship. And I suppose maybe the manner in which they won that game, you know, I know it was probably convincing in the end, but throughout Offaly stayed in touch all that way through. And we spoke about it already. I think that if you blooded a couple of those new players that were brought into the panel, I think it would have added a whole different dimension to that game.
Yeah.
But it's revert to type, and I think John is in a place where he's probably trying to find his best 15, whereas I feel like the Cork and the Galways of the world right now are trying to find maybe their best 20, 25 players.
Right.
So I suppose it's an interesting tactic from what John and Paul are looking to do. And I suppose you're looking still at your bench, like you'd Peter Case, you'd David Reedy, you'd Gerard Hegarty, you'd these boys to come off the bench, but I think he's in a different place in terms of what he's trying to build and what he's trying to build for.
What's his mindset? Take us inside that John Kiely famously doesn't give a lot away. What's his mindset coming into a game? Like, you looked at the performance against Tip a couple of weeks ago, absolutely awesome. You've got a sense, we're playing the All-Ireland champions here, we're going to lay down a marker. You mentioned these 2 teams, Cork and Limerick, seem to be the front runners. Is Kiely, does he get into the emotional side of things around this, or is he very clinical, like say we want to try and find some players? What's he like in a big game week like this?
So I suppose it differs from year to year because, you know, some years, John, you would have seen him try out the different guys in different places, and I think there was a bit of that maybe at the weekend in terms of, you know, Adam English drifting to the corner. You know, other years it was, you know, we need to uncover a couple of additional players maybe to a panel and things like that, and I think every year kind of takes on a life of its own. Yeah. But I think that this year, you know, I suppose the disappointment of the last 2 seasons, you know, losing to Cork in All-Ireland semi-final the year previous, losing to Cork in a Munster final last year. You know, there's history there with Limerick and Cork and recent history, and I think that you're in a place where you want to beat a team. But just tying back to my first point, to potentially meet 5 times in a season. Yeah, very hard to win 5 of those 5. And I think
if he's going to sacrifice one, he might be happy enough with Saturday night, maybe.
I would think so. But again, it's not in their nature. It's not in their nature, and I don't think in either side. You know, even under Pat Ryan's reign, it was the same. It was you just go toe to toe, and whatever about Pat Ryan, Ben O'Connor is just, you know, he's told us he's not backing down. Yeah. And I think Limerick can be.
David, how do you see it?
Yeah, like I think I'm going back to the Munster final is just in my thoughts there, and like the physicality Cork brought that day to kind of match, because in the round robin, then Limerick kind of brushed them aside fairly easy. So I think like Limerick are going to be like, they're not going to bully us, you know, this weekend. I think they'll have that approach to it, and it's going to be making a serious game. Like, I think Cork are going to go all out as well. So like, it'll be real man to man, you know, big.
Give us a winner, go on. Listen to Bríd Stack there, all the feds. Who do we think's going to come out on top?
I think Limerick could do it this weekend now, yeah. I do. I think they do. I think they don't like Cork beating them, do you know what I mean? I don't think they want to give them a foothold, so I think they'll target this game. Can we get over the line here? And obviously Limerick who did Limerick play in the last round? I'm not sure. Galway, obviously, yeah. So I think they're going to try and get over this. They can get one foot in the league final as well, like, so I think we'll see them win it. Yeah.
If you look to Division 1B, lads, I suppose Clare look like the strongest team. They're going to be promoted back up. It's neck and neck between Dublin and Wexford to get back into the top division. Dublin accounted for Antrim pretty convincingly yesterday. Is for Davy Fitz and Antrim, they're in a relegation scare. They should probably still have enough to stay out of it, but will they be disappointed? Would they be looking maybe as a dark horse to get promoted? And it just doesn't seem to have panned out that way for Antrim so far.
Yeah, like I was looking at the fixtures, and the fixture doesn't involve Antrim, but Kildare play Carlow next week.
It's out of their hands, yeah.
And it's out of their hands. So if Carlow were to get a result there, it could bring 3 teams onto 4 points potentially if Antrim were to beat down. So I think they'd be prefer if Carlow or Kildare were to win that game, because Kildare and Carlow play Dublin and Wexford last, which they probably won't win. So they do go to down, and look, I think Davy's probably been planning for the championship really for the Joe McDonagh. So I think if he can get out of the down game, survive the relegation, he'll be happy, and then obviously kind of have the players right for championship. I think he'd be targeting Joe McDonagh more obviously and get them right for that. But they're in a little bit of a pickle, right? It'll depend on that game, Kildare and Carlow, see how that goes.
On the 1B side for you, Séamus, Clare look like the strongest team. They're obviously going to be a massive banana skin for anyone in the Munster Championship as well. Have you been impressed with what you've seen from them so far, albeit at maybe a lower standard than what's happening in 1A?
Yeah, I've definitely been impressed, and I suppose a standout moment for me was when they took and who they took to Antrim. I think it was a statement of intent from Brian Lohan in terms of, you know, taking the Peter Duggans of the world, the Conor Clearys of the world, Tony Kelly, Shane O'Donnell. Like, I can't remember the last time that I saw Shane O'Donnell tug out before a league semi-final and final.
There's a break.
You know, and I think that, you know, it was testament to what he's trying to culminate in Clare. Albeit, you know, you'd expect Clare and fully deserving of them coming up and retaining their 1A status. But I suppose touching on what David was talking about in Antrim, I just feel that what Davy is trying above there, I think it's nearly a backward step that Antrim are after taking from a team that were competing come championship in the last couple of seasons. You know, there's definitely been attrition of players, but it just seems that what Davies brought maybe hasn't, and I know there's been unrest above there in terms of players moving on and maybe not being part of the panel, but I suppose it's worrying time for Antrim for a real hurling county to be looking and facing down the barrel of what they are. I think it's worrying times for Antrim hurling.
Yeah, definitely. On the 1A side, let's say Offaly are gone, Waterford are under pressure, they need a big result. Do we think they could pull it out of the bag, or are they going to be dropping down?
It could be tight. I was thinking like tip Waterford could be very tight. I wouldn't rule out a draw there. Like I'd fancy us
head to head.
The goal like Kilkenny are so hard to beat. Like they're like, geez, the goal they got yesterday at the end, like the battling and the work rate they got to turn over Cork, and eventually Cody gets a serious goal. So you can never write them off. And look, they probably played the harder games the last 2 weekends. They played Waterford and Cork, went down the home straight with them. We've got over Waterford relative ease, and we'd Offaly, so we could be that bit fresher. So I'd see us maybe picking up hopefully a win next weekend, which would mean then obviously Waterford, the head-to-head will come into it a little bit. So it's a huge game for Waterford this weekend. They'd have to throw everything at it against Tip. I know Tip have that loss against Limerick, and Sheedy be looking for, or not Sheedy, but Cahill be looking for a big reaction. So we'll see.
Séamus, your side, will Waterford have enough to get out of it, or is there anyone else maybe being dragged down if they do manage to turn over Tipperary the weekend?
I think the big thing for Waterford this weekend is that it's their last game pre-championship.
Their last shot.
I think it's a shot to nothing in terms of, I suppose, what's going to come out of the league, but in terms of what Waterford are looking to achieve this season, I think they have to overturn Tipperary. They're at home, and I think the break that they have come championship, it's massive. You know, you can play 15 or 15 in challenge games every day of the week, but it's not the same as a competitive game. And I think the welcoming the All-Ireland champions in and of itself is a big enough statement and reason enough to get up, and not to mind, I suppose, the manner in which they went down to Galway. So I think Peter Kiely will. I think that the players will have to lead this weekend, and you've seen it. They can. You know what they did in overturning Limerick is in and of itself.
Expecting a reaction. So we'll get our wildcard picks in a few minutes. Kevin, no football this weekend, so you're safe. No wildcard picks for you. But before that, we'll get to all the other results across the Allianz Hurling Leagues in Division 2, 3 and 4. In Division 2, London had a victory over Derry, 3-7 to 14 points. Meath accounted for Mayo, 20 points to 112. And Laois had too much for Westmeath with a 123 to 17 point win. In Division 3, it was a draw between the Rossies and Tyrone. Donegal had far too much for Louth, and Wicklow similarly 5-14 to 7 points victory over Fermanagh. In Division 4, Longford accounted for Lancashire, 3-18 to 12 points. Leitrim nicked a tight one against Cavan, 20 points to 17, and the final game of Division 4, Warwickshire picking up a victory, 3-11 to Monaghan's 13 points, and that's all the games in the Allianz Hurling Leagues. On to the wildcards, lads. Just for the hurling this week, so we're trying to pick what will be the biggest upset this weekend. This has gone, people are trying to dance around these rules the last few weeks. So Séamus, what will be the biggest upset this weekend and why in the Allianz Hurling Leagues?
I think this weekend, Limerick or Cork at home. I think their championship game is down at Porky this year. I think getting turned over in a Munster final in the year previous, I think was a big blow to Limerick, especially going down at home. And I know it was on penalties, but not so much the manner, but just in terms of, you know, having won so comprehensively in their own robin. And then to get turned over in the Munster final. So I see Limerick putting in a huge performance this weekend. And I think they probably need it in terms of the manner in which they won the game against Offaly this weekend. I don't think it was overly convincing. So I see them reverting to type and just going hammer and tongs at this. And I think it should be a rip-roar, but I see Limerick coming out on top.
David,
I'm going to go to 1B. I think it's very hard to call some of the Division 1, like Wexford are playing Clare, and like Down, there's like Antrim to go to Down, that could potentially not go well. I just think Wexford with the Dublin, I think Dublin might have better score difference, so I think they're going to give this a woeful rattle against Clare.
Yeah, it'd be a big win for them. Yep.
I think so, yeah, and like, they've always played fairly well against Clare too. They don't really mind playing them and going down to Ennis, so I think that could be potentially one.
Right,
yeah.
So Keith Rossiter is meant to pick up a victory, according to David, against Clare. And Séamus Flanagan, no surprises, nailing his colours to the mast. The Rebels are not going to get points in the Gaelic rounds on Saturday night. So that brings us to our competition, as always. And speaking of our competition, it's 2 tickets to that match in Limerick on Saturday night. What a blockbuster that's going to be between Cork and Limerick. All you have to do to be in the draw to win tickets to that game is leave a comment under our YouTube video or Facebook. And as always, on Friday's preview show, Aisling will announce the winner for 2 tickets to one of the games of the Allianz Leagues this Saturday night in Limerick. Now, everyone's favourite part of the show, and your debut for all three of you guys. It's the buzzer blitz. You have your buzzers under the table. Or do you? Should. Yeah.
This one.
Live TV, lads. So this is your first go at it. So we've had a couple of people. Owen Kelly's been on nearly every week, as is Noel Connor. So they have a bit of an unfair advantage. Okay, I'm getting word in here. They're trying to make this a bit fairer. Noel Connors is top because he's done it this 20 times.
Okay. Kelly's up there.
Okay.
Too.
So what we're going to do, just to make it fair for you guys, it's your best result from any one go. So it's 6 questions. We've 30 seconds, and you might be familiar with it. First man on the buzzer gets to answer, and if it's wrong, it passes to his rival for this. They're pretty easy questions, lads. So it's not general knowledge. It's just GAA action from the weekend. So fastest man on the buzzers. First question, Kevin, you have no chance with this one. Who scored a goal for Cork within a minute of coming on as a substitute against Kilkenny? Séamus.
Alan Walsh.
Alan Walsh is correct. Who kicked the levelling 2-pointer yesterday? You were there. It was Paddy Morgan. It was the game between Donegal and Galway yesterday. Who was the only team to have a 100% win record in the Allianz football leagues?
Down.
Down is correct, Kevin. Who was Dublin's top scorer in this year's Allianz Hurling Leagues? Free taker. Does your buzzer work?
Burke.
Donald Burke. Okay, we'll give you that one. Which county claimed promotion back to Division 1A at the weekend? I'll let David let this one. Go on.
Was it Clare?
It was Clare, correct. Who did Mayo forward Keane McHale score, or what did Keane McHale score against Armagh?
1-3.
That is correct. Very good, lads. These questions are too easy, Annie. Which county remains undefeated in the Allianz Hurling League Division 2? David.
Division Laois.
Correct. Very good. Oh, James is free. How many All-Stars does Dan Morrissey have? David.
4.
Correct. Very good. Very good. That's perfect timing as well. You got there in the end, David. Kevin and David have got 3. Séamus wasn't too bad. What? 2. Okay, not bad. But that's good. For a first go, lads, that's not bad. And as always, that brings us to the end of this week's show. The buzzers are working. The 3 lads are up and running on the scoreboard as well. Thank you all for joining us on your Monday lunchtime. Aisling is here on Friday to preview the Allianz Hurling Leagues. The footballers have a weekend off, much needed. We do all the hard work anyway. And we'll see you all next week. Have a great week.
Enjoy the view.